Hey guys, and welcome to the second part of the Big Ten preview here on the Pagnotta Take on Sports. I'm sorry about this one being later than last night's. I tried to film this one last night, and we actually had a problem with the internet connection, so it ended up kicking off on me. So now I'm going to have to end up filming it today. I'm going to try to go through this. It's going to have to be a little bit quicker today than I was going to plan on doing last night, but of course we'll start at the bottom of the Big Ten West, and we'll start with the Purdue Boilermakers. When you look at Purdue, I think the storyline coming into the year probably is their coach being on the hot seat, Darrell Hazell, who they hired from Kent State. At the time when they hired Darrell Hazell away from Kent State, many people thought that it was going to be a home run hire, and they had really looked at the recruiting that they had been bringing in, and they thought maybe they had a shot to be pretty good in these next couple of years here in the Big Ten, but it hasn't really worked out for them. They've had a couple of guys that have ended up not having as much success as they maybe thought, and then of course a couple of guys have left the program as well, like Danny Etling, the former quarterback who was expected to be extremely talented and never really worked out. Now he's moved on to Baton Rouge. So Purdue, the questions coming into the year are numerous, and they're going to have to get some answered if Hazell's going to end up lasting. He's 4-20 in 2 years up there in West Lafayette, so he's going to have to be a lot better this year. When you look at it, of course, on the offensive side of the ball for him, it's going to start at the quarterback position. Austin Appleby, his starter from last year, does return. He was mixed in there with Danny Etling a little bit last year. He did have 1,449 yards, but 10 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. So he threw more interceptions than he threw touchdowns. That's a problem, and they're definitely going to have to get that fixed if they feel that they're going to stand any chance to get out of the cellar here in the Big Ten West. Now, there are guys that are also trying to come up there and compete with him for that quarterback spot. Redshirt freshman David Blah and true freshman Eliza Sindelar could also see some time in there if Appleby is not able to perform the way many people hope he will up there in West Lafayette. When you look at the running back position, they lost their best running back from a year ago. Akeem Hunt has moved on to the NFL, so that's a huge loss, as well as Raheem Mostert. So they lose both of those guys. Now they have to find replacements for him. I think they got to start. The guy they have to look to first would be Keontae Green, who is their leading returning rusher from last year. Markel Jones, a redshirt freshman, is a guy who could also get a look. He's expected to make an impact early on. They've seen a lot of promise out of him in camp early on. Other guys that could factor in DJ Yancey, a sophomore, as well as DJ Knox, another sophomore. So the running game, someone's going to have to step up there. I know replacing both of those guys, which is where their success was last year, is going to be pretty tough, but one of those guys, or maybe even both of those guys, will be able to step up and run the ball well. At the wide receiver position, they do return two starters. Danny Anthrop, their leading receiver from a year ago, he had 616 yards receiving on 38 catches and 4 touchdowns last year. So he's a big guy that they get to return. D'Angelo Yancey is another returning starter. So they do have some guys there with a little bit of experience. Dan Monteroso, I think is his name. Dan Monteroso, he is the other wide receiver, and some depth behind them. Not the best, but it is pretty good. On the offensive line, this is where they're stacked. They bring back 5 guys up front, including probably all Big Ten watch list member Robert Kugler. They bring back both guards in Jordan Roos and Jason King, and they also bring back both tackles in David Hedlund and J.J. Prince, as well as a guy that saw enough starting time last year to be considered a starter in Cameron Sermon. So they bring back a whole bunch to this team. And when you look at it for Purdue, I think the depth on the offensive line is definitely going to be key. They're going to hopefully be able to protect Austin Appleby. And if he can get some of his receivers to step up and maybe get one that can hit 1,000 yards, maybe get a good rushing game going, it'll take the pressure off of him. And this team might just be able to find a couple of more wins than the 3 that I have them getting right now. But you look at the defense, this is a group that wasn't awful last year, but wasn't really great. 80th in total defense. They're going to have to probably be a little bit better this year if they hope to get anywhere in this Big Ten West. I mean, when you look at it, the most stacked area on this defense is the linebacking core that return all three starters from last year. Jawan Bentley in the middle. He's only a sophomore. He led the team in tackles last year with 76, or he's the leading returning tackler with 76. So he's definitely a guy that's shown he can play early on in his career, and they could have a couple more years out of him there. Danny Ejikukulu, I think is his name, as well as Jimmy Herman. They're the two outside linebackers, and the depth there doesn't look that bad. So that's their area of strength. In the secondary, they are talented as well. They only returned 2 starters here, but there still is some talent. Frankie Williams, the safety, is one of the guys that I think is an under-the-radar guy to be an all Big Ten guy. And they also returned starting corner Anthony Brown. Now, the other safety position, former quarterback Robert Gregory is most likely going to slide in there and take over that position. He's a hard-hitting safety, so keep an eye on him. And Leroy Clark is expected to be the other starting corner, but guys like DeJuan Hunt and even true freshman Evan Cooper could slide their way in there. And we could see them in there before the season's over. Up front, they do return 2 starters, both of them on the inside, in nose tackle Rajon Howard, and they also do return Jake Repligol on the inside. Defensive ends, they're going to have to find 2 new guys right there. Those spots currently would seem to slide into Gielan Robinson and Evan Panfil. So when you look at it, a defense that returns enough starters, 7, to definitely say they're somewhat experienced. The depth at these positions actually look pretty good with guys that are experienced. There are a couple of younger guys, but really at these positions, they have built some seniority at these positions on both sides of the ball. I think if this defense can be a little bit better, if this offense maybe can get a good mix of run and pass, they have the offensive line already there, and if they can get some consistent play out of their quarterback, you just never really know what Purdue can end up doing. I would like to see them have success, of course. Nothing against Purdue. I think they're a program that deserves to have some success, and I think that their coach, Daryl Hazel, is an extremely talented guy. He just needs to find the right guy, especially a quarterback, to lead his team. And if they can find a good balance, I think they might end up finding themselves at least out of the basement. They may win 1 or 2 more games than I have them winning and find themselves out of the basement. But as I said, 3-9. I have them 0-8 in conference. I just don't think it's this year. I think it's still a couple of years off in the future before they're going to end up being anything worth talking about. And I don't think Hazel will last past this season, so they're going to be looking for a new coach next year. From there, we move to 6th. I have Illinois, the Fighting Illini. They're a team last year that actually made a bowl game. They did get beat by Louisiana Tech, but I think people were a little shocked, even with the loss of Wes Lunt. When he went down to injury, they kept going and found a way to get into the bowl game. So when you look at it, of course, that's the main guy you got to look at for their offense. Wes Lunt, the quarterback, returning, coming off a year where he had 1,763 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions on limited snaps because he was injured. So he's definitely shown promise. I know, he was highly recruited when he was at Oklahoma State, and he was a guy when they transferred that people thought was going to make this program back up to being competitive. I know, you can't really put it all on his shoulders. It's impossible. No quarterback can do it all himself. He's going to have other guys to step up. But I think Wes Lunt is one of those guys that is built to play in this conference with the arm strength. So, when I look at it, I think if he plays remotely how he played early last season, he can make this team one of those ones that could be competitive and maybe pull a couple of upsets. At the running back position, definitely another position where they do return a starter, so it's a position of strength with Josh Ferguson returning. He had 735 yards and 8 touchdowns on just 146 carries. So he's definitely got to keep an eye on. He's going to make that offense a lot better. If they can run and pass the ball, that's definitely going to help them to be a better offense. Last year, it ranked 111th in the country in rushing. That's definitely got to go up. Wide receiver, they were extremely talented coming into fall camp. because they were returning all three starters, and then their best starter, Mike Dudek, went down injured. He had over 1,000 yards receiving with 1,038 a year ago and 6 touchdowns. Now he's out for the season, so that's a huge blow for Illinois. Two returning starters that are coming back are Jermaine Allison and Justin Hardy, the earlier of which they think is going to have to try to fill that role that Dudek had. Hardy's going to have to step up, and some unproven guys like Malik Turner, Tyron Stone Davis, Deontay Taylor, and Marchie Murdoch will definitely have to step up with the loss of Dudek, and that's a huge blow. I mean, Dudek was a talented receiver. He was a guy that was probably going to be an all Big Ten player if he would have stayed healthy and would have been able to play this year. But, you know, I think there's a chance for these guys to step up. I think Allison's going to have a chance to step up and play a big role, and I think Hardy's got to play better too if they want to have a good passing attack. They're going to have to find another tight end as well. Tyler White and Andrew Davis will be battling out for that after they lost their tight end Matt Lacoste to the NFL. So, looking at this offense for Illinois, there are some good pieces here with Lunt, with Ferguson, with Allison, but the loss of Dudek, they have to find a tight end. And then on the offensive line, they do return 3 guys. They return Ted Karras, as well as Joel Spencer, the center, and Christian DeLauro, the right tackle. But they are the blind side. They're going to have to find someone to protect Westlunt at the tackle position and at the left guard position. So that's an area that could be a concern there with the freshman slated to start at the guard position. So, you know, when you look at it, like I said, this team could be effective. I think it's a wait-and-see type effect with them. I think you're going to have to see if they can run and pass the ball at the same time and be more balanced. And if they can, they're a team to definitely watch out for offensively. Defensively, usually when you look at Illinois, you're going to start up front. Their best guy up front this year is Jihad Ward, a defensive end, a senior. He is a returning starter. I mean, not that type of guy that has lived up to what, you know, the Illinois pass rushers have been in the past, with guys like Whitney Merciless, who was great, Jonathan Brown, who ended up producing some good numbers there. So now, you know, it's Ward's chance, and he's got to step up and show that he can be a force off that outside after having just 3 sacks last year. That number has to improve. At the other defensive end position, they are going to have to find a new starter. Dwayne Smoot is the guy who is in there as the slated starter right now, but Carroll Phillips could also find himself in there. They do return one of their starters at defensive tackle. Rob Bain does return. The other one is expected to fall into the hands of Tico Powell, the junior. Gerard Clements, as well as Joe Fonto, could also see some time in there at the tackle positions. At the linebacker position, they do return 2 starters from last year, the better of which is Mason Monheim, who led the team in tackles with 111. He is back. Keep an eye on him for maybe to be an all Big Ten team guy. TJ Neal returns at the middle linebacker position. That's a strength that he returns. And then at the other linebacker position, James Crawford is the slated starter, but keep an eye on Eric Finney maybe to get some reps in there as well. In the secondary, they do return 3 starters, so this might actually be the strongest area on this defense, with D'Angelo Bentley returning at the one corner, Eaton Spence at the other corner. Both of them are guys that could give some of these quarterbacks in the Big Ten problems, especially out in the West. Safety, they do return Tyler Barton, a junior, and they will have to fill the other safety position, but that's expected to fall into senior Clayton Fijidelum, expected to fall into his hands. So when you look at this team, again, last year defensively, against the rush, they were ranked 115th in the country, 109th overall. They got to be a lot better. And if they can even show signs of improvement, if this offense can show flashes of what they saw last year under Lunt, this team could win 7 games. And, you know, looking at it, losing Dudek is a massive blow. I really think that takes away their best threat by a long shot, and I don't think Allison's going to be able to fill it as well as people would hope. Hardy, I don't know if he'll be able to step up. So when I look at it, I have them going 4-8, 1-7 in conference. I think they have a shot, but I think they're more of that team that people are going to look at maybe to pull some upsets. Not a team that's going to be competitive in this Big Ten West. From there, we move up to Evanston, Illinois, for the Northwestern Wildcats at number 5 in this conference, or this part of the conference, excuse me. And they've really been in turmoil ever since they played Ohio State just a couple of years ago. They were ranked. Game day was there, and they ended up losing that game only by 10. But since then, Pat Fitzgerald's crew has just been a disaster. Last year, they won 5 games, but really, when you look at the 5 games they won, I mean, they did end up beating Wisconsin, which was one of their biggest wins of the year. They beat teams like Notre Dame, but also some of these losses that they took, losses at Iowa, like just as an example, 48-7. Losses at Minnesota, a team that people thought they should have beat. Northern Illinois beat them. So, when I look at Northwestern, I think there is talent there. I think Pat Fitzgerald's, he's got this team to where they could make a bowl game, I think, easily, and I think they could be a team that could make a run to shock some people, not to win this conference, but make a run at maybe third in this part of the conference. But first and foremost, got to find a quarterback. They end up having to decide now between Mike Alvetti, a sophomore, a redshirt freshman in Clayton Thorson, or senior Zach Oliver, the latter of which seems to be out of the race in many people's minds. So I think it's going to come down to Alvetti or Thorson. If they can decide on one of those quickly, I think that's definitely going to help them, because their start to their schedule is not easy. They play Stanford and at Duke this year, so that's one part of the schedule to keep an eye on early on. The running back position, this is a point of strength for this Northwestern Wildcats team. In the past, it has been a point of strength, but injuries have really held them back. But Justin Jackson, if he's able to stay healthy, last year 1,187 yards on 245 carries, 10 touchdowns. The dude's talented. He should be in the race to be an all Big Ten type guy, and I think he's definitely going to show up and play some good football out there. He's the guy they're going to be relying on the most in the running game, and even with his numbers, they still finished 100th in the country in rushing. So they have to find. I think they want more of a dual threat quarterback. I think Alvetti is more of a dual threat quarterback. So they'll have Jackson running the ball. Some pressure can be taken off him by the backup running back, Warren Long, too, so it's not all going to be him, especially seeing their history of injuries at that position. They need to have a solid backup there. At the wide receiver position, they do have some weapons for whoever is in there at quarterback. Christian Jones returns after missing last season due to injury. He was the leading receiver in 2012-2013. So both those years he was sensational. Now he comes back. Hopefully he's back in top form. And if he is, he provides a huge receiving threat. Cameron Dickerson, a starter from last year, also returns. That's big for them. And Miles Schuler, a senior, is expected to be the other starting wide receiver. But there's some depth behind them as well. All of them that are experienced juniors or above. So there's definitely some talent here. This offense, the main positions, I mean, the skill positions are pretty loaded here for Northwestern. A little bit more stacked, I think, than we've seen in the past. The quarterback position maybe not as stacked as we've seen with Coulter and Simeon, but if they can find someone there early, they've got the guys around them that can make this team good enough. On the offensive line, they do return 3 starters. Eric Olson and Jeff Mogus return at the tackle positions, and right guard Matt Frazier also returns. The other 2 areas will have to be filled, center and left guard. Those battles could go into the season. So that's an area to keep an eye on, is the offensive line. At tight end, they do have probably their best weapons, 2 of their best weapons, in Dan Vital, who is expected to probably be a first-team All Big Ten at the tight end position. He was their leading receiver returning from last year. This guy really can do it all. He's a great blocker. He's a great tight end. I mean, this guy really has the physical set to play in this Big Ten, and I think he's going to be their best player this year. Garrett Dickerson is another guy. He's the backup to Vitale, but he could see some time in there as well, and he can make a big impact in his own way. So looking at the offense, again, they do return 5 starters. And they don't even consider Jackson one of the starters, and same thing with Jones, who was out for injury last year. So looking at that, I mean, they bring back some talent. This team has some offensive talent around them, and I think that is going to be huge for them going forward, and I think they have a chance to be competitive offensively. Defensively, again, this defense wasn't terrible last year, 53rd in the country. Really, the offense was what hindered them, so if they can play anywhere close to that, they may be able to find some more wins. When you look at it, I think up front is probably their biggest strength right now because of the amount of starters that they do return. They end up returning actually 5 guys that started enough games to be considered returning starters. DeAndre Gibson and Dean Lowry both return at the defensive end position, so that's something to keep an eye on. The defensive tackle positions, you return Greg Kuher, you return Max Chapman, and C.J. Robbins, and that's not to mention the guy who's slated as a starter who was not a returning starter from last year, and Sean McElvey, who's found his way in there. So this is a point of strength for Northwestern. They should be able to rush the passer, and they were 42nd against the pass last year in the country. So that's something to keep an eye on. Have to be a little bit better against the run. So those defensive tackles, I think, are going to have to get a better first push. At the linebacker position, they do return 2 starters, Drew Smith and Anthony Walker, both return. The other outside linebacker position, Jalen Prater, is most likely going to have to fill in there, but keep an eye on Nate Hall to maybe slide up into that position. And then the secondary, this is another area that's of extreme strength. I think this may actually be their best talent-wise group. They do return 3 starters here, but the guy that isn't considered a returning starter might be their best player there. He led the team with 3 interceptions last year. That's Godwin Igwebike. And then beside him at the other safety position is Travon Henry, who led the team in tackles with 73 last year. He returns. A senior that's extremely talented. At the cornerback position, Nick Van Hoos went down early in the year with an injury last year. Now he's back healthy, so definitely keep an eye on him. And Matthew Harris, the corner, he's also another expected returning starter. I wanted to also mention on the offensive line a guy that had been injured for a while. Expect him to make an impact as well, and Ifeadi Odigibello. So definitely, when you look at this Northwestern defense, there's talent there. There's experience there. They get Van Hoos back. So, I mean, when you look at it, I think for sure this is a team that Pat Fitzgerald can work with, that can maybe get them from that bottom half of the Big Ten. Now, it's going to be an extreme push. I don't see them really being all that great. The quarterback position, they got to find someone quick, and I don't think either one of these guys are as talented as Coulter or as Simeon was. I have them going 5-7, 3-5. I think part of the reason they're going to struggle also is because that out-of-conference schedule is tough, but they always seem to play a tough out-of-conference schedule. So maybe if they can go on the road to Duke and win one, that might help them out for sure. If they can win that game against Stanford, that'd be a huge boost out of the gate, but that's asking a lot of Northwestern. But I think even if he goes 5-7, I don't think they should fire him. I think Pat Fitzgerald's moving this team in the right direction, and if he gets another year even after that, I think he can have a shot to make this team really good with the talent that is there and available for Northwestern. From there, we move on. Now we go to Iowa. This is about I would say this is the last team that really is not going to be in contention for the Big Ten West. I think Iowa, I got them going 7-5, 4-4 in conference. I think they're going to be right in the middle of that Big Ten West standings. In 4th. I think they're just going to be an average team. They lose their best guy from last year, one of their better returning stars on the offensive side of the ball, in quarterback Jake Rudock. He moved on to Michigan. So now they have to find a new starter there. It's expected to fall into the hands of C.J. Beathard, who played a little bit last year, but still not a situation you want to see with a guy leaving, especially for an in-conference team. Now you're forced to find a quarterback on the fly here. Running back has always been a position of strength at Iowa. And with Mark Weissman having moved on, now it falls to Jordan Canzeri, a guy who had 494 yards last year on 102 carries. Didn't have any touchdowns, and he's been an injury problem since he arrived there in Iowa City. So he's a guy that could end up finding himself some carries there, but he's got to be able to stay healthy. If he can't stay healthy, LaShun Daniels is a guy who could find himself with some playing time for sure. At the wide receiver position, they're gonna have to find some guys that can help out Beathard. T-Von Smith is the guy. He's the only returning starter. Had 596 yards and 3 touchdowns on 43 receptions last year. He's going to have a little bit more of an improvement on those numbers if he expects to really be the go-to guy. Matt Vanderberg is expected to be the other starter on the outside, but keep an eye on guys like Jacob Hilliard and Andrew Stone who could find themselves in there. The offense that Iowa runs, if it's still the same type of offense, you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets, which means you're going to work in both tight ends. Jake Dusey is one of the more talented guys that Iowa's had at that tight end position. And you got to also keep an eye on Henry Krieger-Kobel. Both of those guys are expected to definitely see the football a lot, especially in those 2 tight end sets, which they will throw out of a lot. So keep an eye on both of them to have good years. At the on the offensive line, they return 3 starters, all of them on the interior, so both tackles end up having to be replaced. That could be an issue to keep an eye on. But center Austin Blythe returns. He's the most talented. On that offensive line, Jordan Walsh and Sean Welsh also return at the guard positions. At the tackle positions, as I mentioned, both of the guys that are expected to be starters in there are sophomores and haven't had any experience, so that's going to be an area of concern for Iowa. But when you look at Iowa, I mean, of course, the offense, they haven't always been great. We've known that. Iowa isn't a team that's built on offense. They're built like a typical Big Ten team of the past, and that is living and dying on defense. And when you look at their defense, talented last year, 22nd in the country overall, 7th against the pass. That's something that I think is a big strength of theirs again this year. Rushing defense, they were 64th, so they might have to try to even that out a little bit. And they did allow 25.6 points a game last year, so they might want to. They're going to have to try to bring that number down just a little bit if they end up wanting to win some of these close games. Most talented guy on defense is Drew Off, the defensive end. He had 8 sacks last year, so keep an eye on him to have another big year again this year. At the other defensive end position, another returning and starter in Nate Meir. Expect him to step up. And at the defensive tackle positions, they have to replace both their starters there. Jaleel Johnson, a junior, and Nathan Bezada, a sophomore, are expected to slide in there. But keep an eye on the guys behind them maybe to slide up and take some reps there as well. At the linebacker position, only 1 returning starter, Bo Bauer, a sophomore from last year. So he's the leader of an extremely young and inexperienced linebacking core. That's an area of concern for the Hawkeyes, who statistically ranked 64th, as I mentioned, against the run. So they're going to have to be. Those guys are going to have to mature quick. Guys like Josie Jewell and Ben Neiman also keep eyes on a couple of seniors that are expected to back them up, and Cole Fisher and Travis Perry maybe to get in there if those guys end up struggling. The secondary, as we mentioned, 7th against the pass last year in the country. Again, they didn't lose a whole lot. They returned 3 starters. Jordan Lomax, the safety, is the most talented guy in that secondary. 92 tackles, the team lead last year. So keep an eye on him to make a huge impact. Desmond King, an all-Big Ten corner last year. He's back with 3 interceptions. Expect him to really shut down some guys in this conference again this year. And Greg Maben is another returning starter at the corner position. The only other area they're looking for a new starter is at the safety opposite of Lomax, and that's most likely going to fall to either Miles Taylor or Brandon Snyder. So when you look at it, again, Iowa, I think, is more talented defensively than they are offensively. They only return 4 offensive starters, so an area of concern definitely at the quarterback position. How will Beathard play? Running back, can they get Kanziri to stay healthy? If they can, that could definitely help if you can have him and LaShawn Daniels be able to run well. They have to get some receivers to step up. Tight ends are going to be there to help. The offensive line, they have to get the 2 young tackles to mature quickly. And then, on defense, the linebacking core is really the area of most concern. The interior defensive line as well, right up the middle with the 2 new defensive tackles. That will hurt against the run game with the linebacker inexperience and the defensive line inexperience. But the secondary will definitely be great against the run again, or against the pass again this year. So keep an eye on Kirk Ferentz's defense to rank pretty high up there once again this year. In nationally in pass defense. So from there we move on. Now it's the teams that I think are definitely going to be competing for the Big Ten West up at the top. All of these teams are 6-2 in conference or better. Third in the conference, I actually have Nebraska. Now the big storyline for Nebraska in the offseason was they fired Bo Pelini, which many people in Lincoln had been calling for. I never really got the reason why. I always thought that Bo Pelini was a good coach. I mean, you look at his record; he was 67-27 in his time there. I mean, that is pretty good. 40 games over 500 is not something that is bad. But in Nebraska standards, I guess it just wasn't enough. But hiring Mike Riley, I don't understand that. I don't think that was the greatest hire that they could have come up with. I think he would have rather stuck with Bo Pelini. But they got him away from Oregon State somehow. So to bring him in there, they saw something out there. And I think looking at the team, they're talented enough definitely to win some games. I have them winning 9 games. But it's going to be a little bit of a tougher transition, I think, than people actually give it credit for. I think they're thinking that Nebraska is going to slide in there really quickly. You got to remember, though, this is a completely different style than what Bo Pelini ran. It is a pro-style offense. A lot of under-center plays are going to be run. So that's Tommy Armstrong Jr., that's not his strength. His strength is running. He had 705 yards, 6 touchdowns on just 145 attempts last year. That aspect will still work in the pro style. They'll allow him to run a little bit, but it's definitely going to be lessened by a large margin. But when you look at his passing stats, there is some chance there that he's still going to be good enough to be that pro-style quarterback that Riley wants, with 2,695 yards passing last year, 22 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. I don't think he's in any danger, of course, losing his job. I think he'll be the guy the entire year, but the question is, how does he adjust to Mike Riley's offense? At the running back position, Terrell Newby and Amani Cross will be battling 4 carries after Amir Abdullah left, their best running back that they've had there in a long, long time. So now one of those guys is going to have to step up. Newby's projected the starter. He's got a little more speed than Cross. Cross is more of a big man, so he's going to try to run you over. But that mix together, if they can get that to work, could make that running game lethal again this year. They were ranked 17th in the country last year, so that, getting it back up there I think is going to be tough, but I think they may be able to if Newby and Cross can work together. At the wide receiver position, there is some talent for Armstrong to throw to. Jordan Westerkamp is a returning starter who's extremely talented. Demorie Pearson-L is a speedster, but he is having some sort of problem. I can't remember if it was off the field or if it was an injury concern, but I know that he was having some sort of issue, and he could end up missing some sort of time here early on in the year. Hopefully it's nothing serious, and he'll be able to get back out there, because that could be the loss that could really hurt this team immensely, because he is so talented. He does what he does at wide receiver with the speed. He's a kick returner as well, so losing him would be just a disastrous blow for this team. And if he can't go, that means they're going to have to, the pressure will fall more on Brandon Riley, a junior college transfer, who slides in at the other wide receiver position. Jamal Turner, the former quarterback, he'll be expected to play much better. Alonzo Moore, who was a returning starter from last year but has been pushed back on the depth chart after not really showing that much to Coach Riley in this offseason. And Glenn Irons, a redshirt freshman, could also end up seeing some time in there as well. So when you look at this offense, again, the skill positions, there's talent here again. The quarterback, they do return their starter. They return Westerkamp, who had 747 yards last year and 5 touchdowns. They do have talent at the running back position. They're not going to replace all of what Abdullah did, because those numbers were crazy, but they can at least lessen the blow there. But they're going to have to get help. Offensive line, they only return 2 starters in their tackles, Zach Stirrup, who's one of the better ones in the Big Ten, and Alex Lewis as well. The inside of that line, they do have some experience there. 2 of these starters are expected to be seniors. The other one's a junior, but they haven't been the starters in their career, so that's something to keep an eye on there. The tight end position, Ethan Carter can end up getting some catches coming his way at the tight end. I think they're going to start running more of the two tight end sets with the pro-style offense, and keep an eye on backup tight end Sam Cotton to see some time as well and maybe catch the ball a little bit more this year. When you look at the offense overall for Nebraska, I think this team is talented. I really do. I think they're talented enough that they're not going to lose games they're supposed to win in the Big Ten West. But when you look at it, I know the crossover games, they do receive Michigan State, and they also get Rutgers. They do get Rutgers. And that game is at Rutgers. They do get Michigan State at home. So the schedule sets up to where they could be in luck. But I don't think this team offensively is going to be talented enough. That switch from the more read option based type offense and more run based offense to this more pro style focus, more old school type offense, I think it's going to be a little bit of a rougher transition, and this is with them going 9-3 and 6-2. And I still think they're going to be good, but I don't know if they're going to be one of the best in the Big Ten. When you move over to the defensive side of the ball, the strength starts on the defensive line. Best player, of course, returning is Malik Collins, the junior defensive tackle. He had 4.5 sacks last year. Expect those numbers to go up. And he also returns his partner at the defensive tackle position, Vincent Valentine. Keep an eye on those two to wreak havoc in the middle. Greg McMullen on the outside. They're going to expect him to get to the passer a little bit more this year. And at the other defensive end position, they do have to find a new starter there. Zach Gangwish is expected to slide in there, but keep an eye on Freedom Akinmaladon to slide in there and maybe see some time there as well. At the linebacker position, they only return one starter from last year in David Santos, but keep an eye on the guys that are sliding in there, and Josh Banderas and Michael Rose-Ivy to definitely have to step up and play a lot better this year. When you look at the secondary, they do return Nathan Jerry, the guy who had 5 interceptions last year. He might be the most talented guy on this entire defense coming into this year, so definitely keep an eye on him. He led the team. He's the leading returning tackler as well with 88 tackles, so keep an eye on him. As for the cornerback position, they only return one starter there as well. That's Daniel Davey. Joshua Kalu is expected to slide in there at the other position, but expect Aaron Williams, a freshman, to maybe get up there and challenge, and we could also see some true freshmen that could get into the race there as well. And the other secondary position expected to be in pretty good hands with Byerson Cockrell, who will be in there. He was a nickel last year, and he's expected to become the starting safety. So Nebraska's not in that bad a shape here. Looking at their team, I think there are some pieces, especially defensively, that are strong. Offensively, there's some guys that do return, but I don't see this team winning this part of the conference. I think they're going to be third just because the transition through coaches is not going to be that easy. If Bo Pelini couldn't get in there and find his way to that Big Ten championship consistently every year, I really don't see Mike Riley being able to do it, especially in his first year. It's going to take him a couple of years to get the type of players he wants in there, because these guys are built towards more what Pelini wanted to do. The offensive system switch is going to be tough on them at first, and I think they're going to have to find some stability there before they can really talk about challenging. And on defense, I think some of these young guys that are taking over these other positions have to step up, and I think there's enough talent there that they could have a good year defensively. So from there, top 2 in the conference, I think this will be another one similar to the Big Ten East, where it will come down to a matchup late in the year. It's going to come down to the game at the end of the season that will be played in Minneapolis, Minnesota at TCF Bank Stadium, the Golden Gophers of Minnesota, and the Wisconsin Badgers. Now, people will say, well, how do you have Minnesota up there competing? Minnesota is good. One stat that I love about Minnesota, and I think is going to keep them that will make people keep them in mind, is Jerry Keel has improved in wins every year since he's been on campus there. Last year they won 8 games. I think they make the push to 10-2 this year. They go 6-2, but they finish second in the conference with a loss in that final game to Wisconsin, who's just better than them. But when you look at the team overall, I mean, Mitch Leadner returns. He's got to be more consistent. But from what I've seen when I've watched some of his games, I think Mitch Leadner definitely has the talent available to him to be able to improve. He also has the running aspect to him. Last year he threw for 1,798 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. He's got to be a little more consistent there, but the rushing ability is pretty good as well, with 452 yards and 10 touchdowns on only 126 carries. So looking at that, you know, he's going to be the main guy this year. They did lose their running back, so his running ability is going to be key. He's got to be able to step up passing-wise, and I think he will be able to because just the way that Jerry Kiel coaches, I think, will definitely help him, and I think he'll be able to mentor Leadner to lead that team. At the running back position, as you mentioned, they lost David Cobb, who left for the NFL. So now they have to try to replace him. That's probably going to fall into the hands of either Roderick Williams or Rodney Smith, but there could be other guys that work their way up into that rotation as well. I think, you know, replacing Cobb's production isn't going to be easy, but guys that have come out of Minnesota, they've always had some decent running backs. So I think one of these guys will be able to step up and definitely run the ball a lot better, you know, a lot better than people expect. When you look at their rushing numbers last year, they were 28th in the country. They got to be a lot better passing. 119th in the country in passing is just not going to cut it. 103rd in total offense. But I think this offense has room to improve. When you go to the wide receiver position, there's not a whole lot of proven talent out here, but there's some guys that could end up stepping up, and guys like KJ May, who's talented. He's the leading returning receiver with 298 yards, on just 16 receptions, only had 1 touchdown now. Guys like Drew Wolatarski, who is expected to step up as well. And also keep an eye on Isaiah Gentry, a redshirt freshman from last year. Jeff Jones, a redshirt freshman from last year as well. Desmond Gant and Melvin Holland Jr. to find themselves into the rotation out there. And the best out of all of them, Holland Jr. is expected to be that guy that could slide up in there and really make some noise if anyone does. When you look at the offensive line, they return 3 starters, 2 at the guard position. Josh Campione, he is the main returning starter at the right guard position. He's one of the better ones in the Big Ten. Joe Bjorklund is the other one that returns at the guard position. He's a senior. And at the right tackle position, they return Jonah Persig. They do have to find a new center, but that should fall into the hands of senior Brian Bobeck. And Ben Lauer on the outside, a junior, is expected to take over at the left tackle position. So there is some talent here offensively. I think it's going to really depend on how Leadner plays. I think he's going to have a chance to step up. I really do. I think they're going to be able to work with him over the offseason and get a lot better. I think they've been working with him well over the offseason, so definitely keep an eye on him to, you know, show drastic improvement, and he's going to have to. The run game, they got to find someone there early on in the year. They can't let that one go out the window and just try to stick to the passing game, you know, because they ranked 119th last year. So the rushing game, I think, is going to have to be the key again this year. Wide receiver, you got to get someone that can step up there. Also got to look at the tight end position. Maybe someone can step up there, and Lincoln Plasek or Duke Anyanwu there. So, you know, when you look at this team, I think the strength of the offense is the offensive line. I think this team offensively has the talent to be competitive, and I think Jerry Kiel will make this team competitive, but they've got to come out, they've got to run the ball consistently, they've got to get some receivers to step up, and if they can do that, their offense will be good enough to help this defense. That is pretty good. When you look at the defense, I think it's got to start in the secondary. This is the most talented area on this team. Brian Bodie Calhoun, I think, is their most talented guy. And the senior corner returns after having 5 interceptions last year. But his partner, Eric Murray, isn't an easy person to go against either. So keep an eye on both of them to really shut down some of these teams they're going to play and some of these wide receivers they're going to play here in the Big Ten. At safety, they do return to Marius Travis, so expect him to have another good year, the senior. And the other position that they have to fill in, Antonio Johnson, a senior, is expected to fill in there with Ace Rogers, who's had a little bit of experience as well behind him. So keep an eye on Minnesota's defensive secondary to definitely be pretty good again this year after ranking 18th last year. This defense ranked 39th overall in the country, in large part to that passing defense. When you look at the linebacker position, Jack Lynn is the best returning linebacker. The outside linebacker returns. Devondre Campbell, a senior, also returns. He led the team in tackles a year ago, so keep an eye on him to try to become the leader. At the other position, Cody Poak will take over there at the middle linebacker position, so that's an area that could be of concern, but keep an eye on that and see if he's able to step up, either him or Everett Williams, and defensive coordinator Tracy Clay says he's seen great things out of both of them. So that could be an area of concern, or it could be an area of surprise for them. On the front line, defensively, they do return 2 starters. One of their defensive tackles, in Therian Cochran. He is their best returning guy up on the front line. He had 4 sacks last year. Look for him to improve on that this year. Stephen Richardson, a sophomore defensive tackle, also returns, and expect him to definitely make more of an impact as well. At the other defensive end position, Hendrik Ikpe, expect him, as well as his brother Scott Ikpe, to take over at the defensive end and defensive tackle positions for Minnesota. And if they can have anything like what they had last year defensively, I think this team will definitely be in games. And I think with Jerry Kiel as their head coach, I think their offense will get better this year. I think this Minnesota team's that team that is a shocker, is a Cinderella-type feel to it, that makes a run, and makes a run at this conference, because when you look at this part of the Big Ten, I think there are some teams that are down. Iowa's not playing as well as they usually do. Nebraska is not playing as well as they usually have. And you look at the teams at the bottom, I don't think they'll be able to be competitive with the great defenses that they have here, that they have at the top with Minnesota and with Wisconsin. And like I said, I think it comes down to that game at the end of the year, but Wisconsin is just too talented and will end up beating them. But I think Jerry Kiel's got a 10-win regular season underneath his belt. And then finally, the winners of the Big Ten Conference, we're going to have a rematch of the Big Ten Championship again from last year, hoping and praying it's not a 59-0 blowout. Wisconsin will end up back in the Big Ten Championship game. They'll win the Big Ten West. I mean, you look at this team, there is definitely talent here. They pretty much just reload. Quarterback Joel Stave is expected to be the starter. He's got to be more consistent. He's got to be able to make sure that he's the starter this year. They've been going back and forth between quarterbacks for a while now here, and they've got to they got to pick one and just stick with them. For sure. I think they're going to stick with Joel Stave here this year. But you look at his numbers last year, 1,350 passing, 9 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. So again, you see that those troubling numbers of more interceptions than touchdowns. That's something that's definitely got to improve. The running game, even though they lose Melvin Gordon, you look at his backup from last year, Corey Clement, actually found a way to get nearly 1,000 yards with 949 yards and 9 touchdowns on just 147 carries. He should go nuts, might even reach near probably 1,600, 1,700, maybe even 1,800 yards this year. And if it wasn't for Ezekiel Elliott, he would almost be a lock to be all Big Ten Conference Player of the Year, possibly. And behind him there is some depth as well. Tywan Deal could definitely see some carries as well to try to take some pressure off of him. So I mean, you really don't know. I mean, I think this backfield is going to be loaded again. I think Clement is going to be really good, and if Deal could be what Clement was last year, they could be just as lethal in the rushing game as they were last year, where they ranked 3rd in the country, which is just nuts. I mean, you look at the wide receiver position, there's not a whole lot of proven guys here. You look at their only returning starter, Alex Erickson, a senior, does return. He did have 772 yards last year on 55 receptions, but just 3 touchdowns. Besides him, they're going to have to get someone to step up. Robert Wheelwright is the projected starter right now, but my guy to keep an eye on is the senior Jordan Frederick, maybe to finally live up to his potential. Reggie Love is another guy that's waiting behind there to possibly slide up and find himself a role in that passing game. If they can get one of those other wide receivers, or maybe even 2 of them, to step up and play well, give Stave some options to pass to at the receiver position, I think this offense could be even more lethal, because they've got to be better than 116th in the passing game last year. They are able to win games with their rushing offense, but as we saw, if they were able to pass in that game against Ohio State, they would have at least given them a better run. They probably wouldn't have won the game, but it would have been a lot better than 59-0. At the tight end position, this is an area to keep an eye on for maybe some potential game breakers here. Troy Fumagelli, keep an eye on him. He's expected to slide in and take the starting job away from Austin Traylor, but the senior could also see some time out there, so both of those guys could work in to that offense well and find some catches there from Stave. On the defensive side of the ball, the strength is in the secondary for sure. They do return all 4 starters from last year, and one of them is expected to be replaced before season starts. When you look at it, Michael Caputo is the starting safety. He is a great starting safety, but the problem, I think, that you had for Wisconsin, they have to have more takeaways. -9 in turnover differential last year, 110th in the nation. They're leading guys with interceptions. They only had 2 guys that returned that had interceptions last year, and all 4 of these guys are returning starters, so that's a problem. Caputo and his other safety partner, Lubin Figueroa, he also had an interception. Each one had one for themselves, but Figueroa is actually expected to be knocked out of his position by former quarterback Tanner McAvoy, who's moved all around. He played quarterback, he played defensive end, he played a little bit of linebacker. Now he's at safety, and they've said from what they've seen, he's been playing that well that he could actually find himself in there as the starter. At the cornerback positions, 2 of the better ones in the Big Ten, and Darius Hillary, don't want to try to test him too much, and Sojourn Silton on the other side isn't much better of an option to go after. He may actually be even worse to go after. So this secondary is loaded. They've got all the talent in here. They're going to be one of those teams. They were ranked 4th in the country last year against the pass. They could be ranked number 1 in the country this year against the pass with the talent that they have in that secondary. At the linebacker position, of course, they run the 3-4 defense, so they do have 2 linebackers returning in Joe Schobert on the outside, and Vince Biggle is the other one. Both of those guys are the outside linebackers. Biggle, who led the team in sacks last year with 7.5, he may even improve on that number, and look for Schobert to step up and play well this year as well. In the interior, they have to find some guys that will step up to replace the departed starters. Leon Jacobs is expected to be the 1 starter. He is a junior. TJ Edwards, a redshirt freshman, is expected to be the other starter, but keep an eye on guys like Keelan Brokins and Dakota Dixon to fill in those roles if the starters that are up there aren't able to perform early on in the season. On the defensive line, up front, you've got only 1 returning starter in Chike Obiasha. So a sophomore from last year, but he played well last year. Look for him to step up and have a better year this year. The other 2 areas they are going to have to replace departed starters. Alex James is expected to be one of the defensive end takers, but keep an eye on James Adigi Anjo on at the other defensive end position, and at the nose guard position, that'll probably either fall to Arthur Goldberg or redshirt freshman Jeremy Patterson. So, when you look at this Wisconsin defense, the area I think that you would be concerned, if any, would be the rushing defense, but I don't think they'll have a problem. Paul Chryst, I think, will slide in there and should have no problem. This is the only issue for Wisconsin, is Gary Anderson leaving in the offseason. That's a huge issue because he's pretty much up and left out of nowhere, and it's starting to make people question whether Barry Alvarez is the guy you want to work under. Chris moves over from Pittsburgh, where he had some success, back to his old stomping grounds, where he was the offensive coordinator here for a while. So when you look at it, I think Paul Chryst definitely has a shot to make this team, make this team a Big Ten contender for sure. I think he'll keep them up there. It's not like they're bringing in an entirely new coaching staff that has no idea what's going on. So I think the transition will be smooth. The rushing game is just so good that I don't think anyone's going to be able to stop it again this year. If Stave can even slightly improve, they could find themselves maybe with an outside shot to make the playoff. This defense, I think, is going to be good again this year. I think they're going to be really tough to pass on for sure. To run on, it'll probably be an issue as well because of the way that they have been defensively for years. So when I look at this team, I really think they are the team that will take the crown in the Big Ten West. And I think it's going to be a great matchup in Indianapolis this year. I think it's going to be a lot different than last year. I think it'll be a much closer game than last year because I think Wisconsin is more talented this year than they were last year. So, if they can find a passing offense, that game could be a lot more interesting when they meet in Indianapolis at the end of the year. So I'm done with the Big Ten, guys. We finished it. It was a pretty fun conference to go over. What I'm going to do is I will film the Pac-12. I may end up filming that tonight, or at least one part of the Pac-12 tonight. And then I will, of course, go into the SEC. Still trying to get one of my friends in on that. Maybe even two of my friends in on that. So that could get very interesting there if we have a couple of guys to talk about the SEC. And then I will probably close with the non-Power 5 conferences. That one won't be an extremely long show. I'm really just going to cover some of the teams that I think will win their divisions, could win their conferences, and maybe a team or two that can make a run to get in there and bust the playoff or at least make things interesting. And as you guys know, subscribe to my channel right below here. You can watch me every week or whenever I end up doing the show. I'm going to have to start doing them just a little bit more before college football season. Follow me on Twitter at FutureTarHeel. Follow me on Instagram at Anthony_Pagnotta96. And thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys on the next episode of the Pac-12 special.